Hello, brother friends and sister friends. Welcome to the Heart Set Above podcast. I'm Ellen Radcliffe, a therapist and a believer, here to help you navigate faith, relationships, and life in a world so far from Eden. This podcast is a space where we'll explore topics that matter deeply. Things like grief, connection, identity, and practical faith, grounded in both therapeutic wisdom and biblical truth. Whether we're wrestling with the messy middle between love and righteousness or learning to communicate like Jesus, we'll do it together with hearts set on things above. So grab your coffee, settle in, and join me as we pursue deeper connection with God, ourselves, and others. Let's dive in. All right. So, Georgia, we're recording a podcast today that we've already recorded. Are you having deja vu?
I will. I definitely will. I feel like I'm definitely going to it's going to come to me more and more as we speak, I think.
Yes. Well, fortunately, both of our brains are not working at full capacity because neither of us remember at all what we said in the previous non-recording. But you're right. Maybe it'll come back to us as we were talking. But yes, this is, as we've said many times before, we have no idea what we're doing on this podcast. We felt compelled by God. We're serving and loving God in this. And that means that it's not always as polished and pristine as it would be if we were, inherently podcast producers. So because of that, I forgot to hit the record button once in one of our very early episodes. And it was kind of like a foundational episode. And so we said, I love your wisdom, Georgia. This was really kind of you driving it, saying, let's wait a while before we re-record that one because we don't want to. Yeah, I don't know. What was your thought in that? Like, why should we wait a little while?
I don't know. I suppose it was just, I think for me, I was just scared of like the idea of like it being like inauthentic, I suppose, or like feeling like, oh, we've already done it, so maybe our heart won't be in it, or it'll just be a bit of a script. And especially because it was so early on as well, I think that was maybe more of that risk. And so I was like, maybe we do need time. One, so maybe we will forget, which we have.
Which we didn't check. Yep, that worked.
But also so that kind of maybe it would bring back some of that initial like we want to talk about this. But also I think it was a loss that we
were mourning. Yeah.
We were mourning because we were so proud of it as well. We were like, wow, that was good. I feel like we're getting somewhere. Yeah, we were like, wow, that was a really good one. And then when we found out we didn't have it anymore, it was like, oh no.
It was a loss. That's a good way to say it. We needed time to grieve that loss.
We did. We needed some.
But that was wise that you were thinking, let's have it be authentic and not scripted. Because you're right. Like if we hadn't forgotten completely what we said originally, which we have, I think we would have tried to recreate because it was good. And we would have tried to recreate it. So I'm glad that you and I have, memories like toddlers and we can't, we can't remember what we talked about. Yeah. Thank you, God. That we're too dumb to remember.
Right. Blessings in disguise.
Yeah, exactly. So this podcast that we recorded but lost was we were going to call it Out of Eden. This one I guess will be called Out of Eden. Yeah. And we were going to talk about just the reality of us not living in Eden anymore and what that means and how appropriate that we're grieving the loss of our recording, which is, a factor of the fall of this world and the imperfections of this world. And we felt grief over it. And that is so in line with what we wanted to talk about today / back then about not living in Eden. So what are your thoughts on living out of Eden? Like, is this anything you've ever thought? I know this is a big part of how I see the world and we've known each other for a few years. So have you ever, before we met each other, thought about this concept of not living in Eden?
Yeah, I did, but I think I maybe kind of thought about it in a different way, which after our sort of like getting to know each other and our sessions together, I think I then attached it to this idea about Eden. But I remember when I was in university kind of reaching this realization where I was feeling really overwhelmed by the state of the world, and I was feeling a lot of I think a lot of like out of control of what can I do about my character? What can I do about the
Mhm.
world at large? What can I do about my friendships? Like feeling like out of control of like change I wanted to see take place, and and I sort of associate. I couldn't quite place where this kind of out of control feeling was coming from, or where I could sort of lay it to rest with God, or like maybe what God's thoughts on it would be. Um, and then I started thinking, I suppose, yeah, big picture about heaven, and
Mhm.
how I long for heaven, and how I long for this, um, yeah, this kingdom come, and this like world where peace and harmony is restored. And then I kind of realized, like, wait, this change that I'm wanting to see in the world, in myself, like in relationships that I have, like maybe not all of it I will see this side of heaven, and maybe what I'm actually feeling right now is a homesickness. Like my spirit longs for
Mm.
heaven, and I feel that sense of like that kind of reach upwards of like, oh, I so wish I was there. I really long for it. I want to be home. I want to be where my spirit like feels like um truly at rest. And
Mhm.
that kind of provided some yeah, a place to rest for those out of control feelings of like, wow, this really might, these feelings might persist, of like, or these realities might persist of like my wrestling with the world at large or my character. But that's just a reality of being far from home, and
Mm.
being homesick. And then meeting you, and I remember when we were talking, I think, about the war in Ukraine, and you said, "This is." It sounds like you're finding it hard. You feel far from the garden. That was it. You said you feel far from
Mm.
Eden, and it brought to mind that idea of my homesickness. I was like, yes, I
Yeah.
do feel far from Eden. That is exactly what I feel right now. I miss clearly something in my soul, the part of me that kind of, where eternity is set on my heart. That's the part that's going, I'm longing for that right now, and I miss it. And um, I wasn't made for this. So, but that was my
Yes.
relationship to out of Eden before meeting you. How did you kind of come to know it for yourself?
Well, I love what you said about homesickness that
Mm,
when I sort of had this realization in my own, I mean, of course, kind of like you, right? Like I've
mhm,
always known we don't live in Eden. And
mhm.
there's, implications of not living in Eden the way that God created us to exist. But I never really thought too deeply about it until my best friend who I grew up with, she had maybe a 1 year old, 1.5 year old at the time. And it was just like we were talking, we're kind of gone through life together and we talk on WhatsApp almost every day, really, sending messages back and forth. And so she was describing this difficult period with her daughter. And she was just not coming of age, but like coming into the age where children are defiant and more needy and more disobedient, right? Like it's right about that 1 year age where you have to start like implementing boundaries and consequences and things like that because they're more aware. And she was describing how difficult this transition was. And she said she had this epiphany standing in the kitchen one day. Something had happened, and she, oh, I know her daughter. It just felt like her daughter needed her constant attention. She was like, I can't even make her a sandwich or like pour a drink without her needing my constant attention. Like this is so unrelenting, but also unattainable. Like I can't give her the attention that she needs. I'm just incapable of giving her the amount of attention that she wants from me. And she kind of had this epiphany like, oh, well, she wasn't made for my love. She
Wow,
wasn't made
yeah.
for my level of love. She was made for God's level of love. And I can't offer her that. And so she shared that with me. And truly, it is like, it changed my life. It's like one of those golden nuggets that just made me see the world in a whole different lens. And I thought, yes, that's so none of us were made for this world. And I know for me, like what you're describing about homesickness, I have felt from an early age. I've characterized it as a hole in my heart, right? That there's, because I always love in Ecclesiastes, it talks about there's eternity. God set eternity in the hearts of men. And so I sort of envisioned it as this like hole in everyone's heart. It's kind of I call it a God shaped hole. Maybe it's shaped like a cross, right? And we try to like shove different things in that hole. I know when I was growing up, I tried to shove drugs and alcohol and friendships and romantic relationships and traveling and work and all all these other things that I thought could bring me identity, fulfillment, peace, belonging, etc., love and worth and identity pretty much. I tried to shove it in that God-shaped hole, and it did help take the ache away, right? Like it didn't throb as bad, I guess, when some of those things came in, but it didn't fully fulfill that hole. And I think what I realized in my friend sharing this epiphany with me about her daughter is I don't think that hole can be filled fully this side of heaven because we don't live in Eden. We are far from the garden. And therefore, everything we experience, even the good things, even like love from our parents or love from our children, but also the bad things, the hurt and the pains and the grief and the guilt, all of those things are experienced in a fallen world, in a fallen state, because we are fallen in a fallen space. So even the good things we experience are less than what we were meant to experience, right? Like the love that we get from our parents is but a remnant of the love that we were created to experience. So I think it all fits in so well. Like I love this homesick idea that brings to my heart, this real longing, like you said, to be reconnected with your homeland, with your, fellow kinsmen of heaven. But I just think it's so funny that we each came up with our own version of reconciling the fallenness that we experience on earth. For you, it manifested more in homesickness. For me, this hole in my heart. For my friend, it was, I'm unable to offer this love that my child was created for. But it shows me that obviously we all experience this hole, this homesickness, this lack of, right? This fallen state that we were never really created for. And we all experience that discrepancy in what we were meant for, what we long for, and what we are given, what we experience here on earth.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting hearing how it can kind of, I suppose, manifest quite like in different ways. Like even it sounds like your friend experienced it like in a relational way, and I
Mm,
think for myself it was like wanting to see change. Like I used to get so frustrated with myself because I would feel um like feel like I can't see things changing, or I feel so unable
mm,
to influence or to like I felt powerless. And then it sounds like for you it was like um to find a identity maybe, or find some sort of like way of understanding who you are. And like that's just so interesting that like it was kind of this underlying of like an ache of some sorts, but kind of comes out differently. And maybe I don't know, maybe that's like our different, like that's how different personalities kind of work, where it's like it kind of can manifest differently for all of us, but at the end of it is this kind of, I don't know, like a twinge of something or an ache, which tells us
yeah.
that I wasn't made for this. Like I wasn't made to feel like I, that the world is like despairing, or like that my
Hmm.
character is kind of a hopeless case. Like, that kind of, I wasn't made to experience that. Yeah, so I think that's really
Yeah.
interesting how it can kind of come out differently.
Yeah, I think what's probably true is that we all experience that ache, that longing, that discrepancy in every aspect of life. And different aspects resonate differently with each of us, right? So, like, you experience that ache relationally. I experience that ache relationally. You
Mm,
experience that ache in your identity and your work, just as every other person does on this earth, right? So, like, we all experience that ache in every facet because every part of our life, every part of our being is fallen.
mhm.
But yes, you're right. It's sort of like I always ask people when they become a Christian, what got you? Like
Right.
what
What do they
moment did you
answer?
have? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like what moment did you have where it clicked, where God
Yeah.
got you? Like God snagged your heart. And it's different for like God is unchanging. His love is unchanging, right? It's not like God revealed himself in a new and different way to that person, but there was something that clicked for that person given their worldview, their cultural upbringing, their, holes and aches in their own heart, their baggage, their hurts. And so there was something that clicked for each of us. And it's just a
Mm.
different aspect of God that we encountered that kind of like snagged our heart for him. And so, in the same way, I think, yeah, for all of us, I can assume there's like a moment where we sort of connect with that eternity from heaven and the fact that we don't live there and we experience that ache, that homesickness, that hole, that fallenness in our own unique way. But it is a universal fallenness. Absolutely.
Sort of on that line, like even that idea of like it it speaks to like, our relational need or our need for identity or our need for I don't know, like I'm trying to think of like a word that would describe what exactly I was feeling. I suppose like a feeling of enoughness, maybe worth or
Mm,
value or
worth, yeah.
like something like that. And I was gonna ask actually, what answers does this what answers does this concept Hmm, that's not it. What questions does this concept provide answers to? Like to me, I think the way it speaks most profoundly is that it answers um, how, like, the way that like sin has impacted us, like on so many levels, like not just like independently in terms of like how I feel like sometimes I am so like, the way Paul describes in First Corinthians 7 of like, I do not know the good. I do not know why I do not
Mhm.
do the good that I want to do. Like that sort of like torment.
Mhm.
But then it's also like the way sin impacts us like on a worldwide level of like, there are wars going on. There is suffering that is like unimaginable. And we know this even, I think, from being therapists of like, we are working with clients who have gone through unimaginable suffering. And I think when it comes to like those big questions, I think the idea of like we're just not in the garden can feel like an answer for me, where it's like,
Mhm.
there's going to be this world is unfortunately not in the state of Eden and therefore is going to have a brokenness to it, which then um, is going to impact us on those like macro scales as well as those micro scales of like how we feel towards ourselves and our own sin and the ability to overcome that, I mean, obviously, God is in our lives and God is in this world and he can work, but like there is when we feel those sense of hopelessness, I think out of Eden kind of speaks to that. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't know if you have any thoughts on like what
Yeah. Well, I
questions it
love that
answers.
question. I love that question. I forget exactly how you said it. I'm going to mess it up too. Like, what
Questions
questions does this
does it
provide the
answer?
answer
Yeah,
to?
like what does it
Yeah.
speak to, I suppose.
I think everything,
Yeah.
right? Because like
Yeah.
everything is fallen. And I'm talking about big things and little things. You're right.
Mm,
I met with a client today who had been raped.
yeah.
And she asked, how could this happen? How could a good God who loves me allow this to happen? And if we turn that into a math problem and said, all right,
Mm,
let's trace this back.
mhm,
How could this happen? How could this perpetrator, this person who violated you, how could he come to a place in his life where he did this to you? Well, he probably wasn't treated well as a child, right? Maybe
mhm,
he was sexually abused, or
mhm,
maybe he wasn't loved the way that he was supposed to be. And so that came out as a need to, fulfill a hole in his heart that eventually culminated in his violation of you, right?
mhm.
Let's trace that back. What allowed him not to be raised the way that he should have been? Well, his parents didn't, love him the way he should have. So maybe they didn't experience the love they needed in their childhood to be able to love their child well, right? And if we trace it all the way back through the generations, we would eventually get back to Eden, right?
So true.
The
Yeah.
answer would be because we don't live in Eden anymore, because we live in a fallen state, because we chose our way over God's way, and everything we experience is fallen. And the same can be said, that same math problem can be said for little things too. I also met with a client today who said, I don't know why, but every time I get a birthday gift, I'm disappointed. And it actually hurts me more than if I just didn't get anything. So I just rather people not get me anything. And I pressed on to that and I was like, okay, let's figure out what's underneath that. Why? And essentially what we figured out is she doesn't feel like she's seen, known, and understood by the people in her life, right? Like they get her gifts that they think anyone would like, but they're not making it specific to her. And it hurts her feelings that she doesn't feel understood and seen in these gifts that she's getting from her loved ones. And so she'd rather not press on that raw wound and just get nothing, right? And if we were to trace that back, why don't they see and know? Why does it make you sad when you get a birthday gift that does it make you feel seen, known, and understood? Well, because your husband and your children and your friends aren't able to offer you the love that you were meant for. Why aren't they able to offer you the love that you were meant for? Because their parents didn't love them the way that they were meant to be loved, and their friends didn't love them the way that they were meant to be loved, and so on and so forth through the generations until we get back to Eden. So I think think that some people think, oh, out of Eden, living out of Eden only affects those big things, trauma in our life. I think it is the answer to all of the little pieces of hurt and grief and discrepancy that we feel in our life. If we were to make it into a math problem and trace it back, it all goes back to the garden.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah, where it's like, yeah, all those smaller things are a part of it too, where it's like, God intended this this wonderful garden that was refreshing and harmonious and just perfectly good. And of course after that it then has implicated everything, and like I suppose the result is like not just like um sin but brokenness as well. And I mean, it's interesting, those two words, and like, are they the same thing?
Yeah.
What's the difference? Maybe that's something else we could talk about one day.
Yeah.
But like it is like, it's created well, it's then the fallout has become a broken world in which even those small like feelings of like I'm hurt or I feel misunderstood, I feel misrepresented, um, kind of stem from that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That would be such an interesting conversation, sin versus brokenness. Obviously,
Yeah.
we have some culpability in sin, but we also experience brokenness that just is. Like a lot of it's just neutral. It's not anything we intentionally did. It doesn't fall in the sin category, but what we experience is fallen and therefore broken. And so part of this brokenness that we experience in life, it doesn't just affect our perspective and our hearts and our relationships. It definitely does affect all of those things, how we experience love, how we convey love, what we expect in love versus what we get in love, right? Like those are all big parts of it. Also, our abilities, right? We might have a gift that God has given us, a piece of Him that exists in us, right? Like we have these talents that we were made in the image of God and we can exude those. But even that we experience in fallen ways. So even the good things in life we experience in a fallen state. But also, I think living out of Eden also affects the natural creation, like the natural order of the world. I think about this with my own health, right? Like, or even the planet's health,
Right.
that our planet lives outside of Eden, right? So the natural order of things, animals, the vegetation, the sea life, right? Like everything exists now in a fallen state. And that has implications not just in nature, but also nature affects us as well. And so I'm thinking like we're all nutrient deficient. We all struggle with our weight. We all struggle with, brain fog and anxiety and depression. And a lot of that is certainly we can trace all of that back to the garden from various avenues. But I think part of it is even through the avenue of nature existing in a fallen state. All of our foods don't contain the nutrients that they were supposed to contain in Eden. And we don't have the relationship that we did with animals in Eden, and we don't have the relationship with the ground and toiling, the soil that we did in Eden, right? Because that was part of the natural consequence of no longer living in Eden. So in the garden, what I remember reading is that the natural consequences were sort of in two major categories. One, us and nature, like our relationship with the natural world was thus affected, right? That was kind of Adam's curse, was now it's going to be hard to toil with the ground. Your relationship with it is kind of broken. It's fallen now. And then also relationally, right? That was Eve's curse, to say, hey, your relationship with your husband is now going to be strained by, vying for control and lack of trust and all of this stuff. So I think that we see major implications of the fall in those two main areas, which those two main areas affect everything, the natural order of creation and our relationships. Like that is our whole life.
Yeah, that's our entire existence right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, I mean, it does make me think then how important that statement is of you were not made for this, and
Yes.
how that is so needed in this conversation. Like, like even what you were saying of like the fact that our bodies hurt and decay, and sickness exists, and um broken relationships exist, broken relationships with nature exist, and the fact that the world is decaying. Like, I think there can be so much, like even this idea of like ecological anxiety being such a real thing for, current generations.
Yeah.
Like I just can't help but think how much you were not made for this is so
Yes.
important to hear. Like it was never meant to be this, and the fact that we're living in this aftermath was never the plan. And I suppose that then brings up, then how do we how do we do this?
Yeah. Well, I love that. Yeah. Because that does provide some sort of solace. And I
Mm.
see that in the eyes of my clients, even when I convey that message. You were not made for this. This is never how it was supposed to be. And there is a bit of relief in that.
Yeah.
But the rest of that sentence is, but it is. It was never meant to be, but it is, right? Like, so like how, yeah, but what do we do with this reality? And I love that you brought up powerlessness, because that is a constant living out of Eden. Like, that is our sad reality in every aspect of life now, is that we don't have control. We are powerless against this current I wouldn't say completely powerless, but we're powerless against restoring Eden. Like, God didn't give us that responsibility in the Bible. He says, hey, now you're fallen. Now this world is fallen. I'm going to come back and restore it one day. Until then, navigate this fallen world as best you can with me at the forefront. Seek me through everything, but you don't have the power to restore anything. And I really think that as Christians, we get that skewed a little bit. Like, I think we think it's our role to restore Eden, especially in the States, right? Like, we feel like we have to make everyone else see God's way and restore, the ways of Eden, the ways of the Bible. And the sad reality is that we are exiles here. This is not our world. Like, God will come back and restore it, but we're not called to restore it. So that's sad, because we are powerless here, right? As exiles. But it's also freeing that we don't have to restore it. Like, that's not our end goal here, is to restore Eden and then we'll get our treasures in heaven. No, God's like, hey, you don't have to worry about that. I already got that covered. Only I can restore it. You just seek me through the mess as best you can. Navigate this mess with me at the forefront, trying to seek me, and I'll take care of the rest. So it really is freeing, I think, once we can accept that. But I think the answer to that question, like, what do we do with the rest of that? Like, yes, you were never meant for this, but you are in it. So we have to figure out how to navigate it. I think the number one answer I would have is, you don't have to fix it. You don't have to restore it. Like, let that free you from having to restore, from that compulsion to restore. And now figure out, how do you navigate this with God at the center of your own heart? What else, though? I'm sure there's more to that answer. Like, what do we do with this reality that's, this crappy reality that we're all gifted with, this living outside of Eden? Besides accepting what is, not having to restore it, then what? What do we do then?
Right. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say, like, I think the idea of it being freeing, I think, is so like, it's like, like, it adds even more to that sense of, like, that relief of, like, you were not made for this. So
Mm,
you're like, you were not made for this, and you were also not meant to fix it. Like, there is a lot of
yeah.
relief in these statements, where it's like, in those initial responses to being far from the garden and being out of Eden. And to me, it just brings to mind the example of Jesus in a new light, in a way. I don't think I've actually ever thought of this before, of, like, his life being that example of, like, his time on earth, this first time that we have written in the Bible, that wasn't his restoring. Obviously, he restored, like,
Mm,
on a spiritual level, humanity through the cross, but his actual life wasn't like, this isn't me doing the whole restoring. That's the second time I'm coming. This time I'm living in the mess, just like we do, and I'm gonna
mhm.
relate to God whilst I'm in the mess, and I'm gonna choose to seek him and seek his way of living whilst being in the mess. And then next time I come back, that's when I'm going to restore. But I just, like, I'm so grateful for
Wow.
that example. When I think about it now, I'm like, wow, Jesus has actually already done it. He's done that holding back of that restoring, and lived far from the garden. And I'm just, like, really grateful.
Wow. That is blowing my mind right now that you're putting it
Same.
in those terms. Wow. Well, because you know what I would say, one of the best books I've ever read about Eden.
Mhm.
It's called The Epic of Eden by Dr. Sandy Richter. You read it, right? We talked
Yes.
about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. And basically what she laid out, it's been a long time since I've read it, and you know how my memory
Me
is
too.
now. Um, so, but what I remember is that, there was Eden, perfection, and then there was the fall. And God has implemented steady steps since then to recreate Eden, but it's been in increments, and we see those increments. Like she describes it as the Noahic covenant, right? So he made a covenant with Noah, and he restored a bit of Eden that way. And then the Abrahamic covenant, and then the Davidic covenant, and then, Jesus came along, and so on and so forth. And so on and so forth. It ended with Jesus. We're currently living in that covenant, right? Where Jesus came and said, yeah, I love what you're saying, Georgia, that he came and showed us. First, he made it possible for us to connect with God while living out of Eden, right? Like the Spirit lives in us. We can connect with him. We have the Bible. Like we have a lot of resources, many more than people in previous covenants had, God's people. And so he made it possible and then exemplified for us how to live out of Eden. He's like, hey, it's possible. It's messy, but it's possible. And here's how you can do it. And he gave, he couldn't exemplify every single aspect of life, but he gave us these pictures of his life so we can use those principles to apply to our current lives, right? And then the next time he comes will be the full restoration, is at least what I think we can understand from the Bible.
Yes.
But yes, we're living in a segment of restoration, but it's not been fully restored. We have been restored to him, but we have not been fully restored in getting back into paradise, getting back into Eden. So yeah, it's this weird, like messy middle space where we know about Eden, we know about perfection, we know about God, we have an idea of what that kind of looks like and how to exemplify it in our lives, or at least experience echoes of it in our lives. But we also have to contend with that, that reality that, what's this called?
The tension.
The tension, thank you.
Yeah.
The tension of we have echoes of it, but we can't fully experience it, and we can't force everyone else to experience echoes of it either. So I really think also kind of what we're saying here is another sad reality of living out of Eden is not only do we have to accept we don't have power here, but that inevitably brings up a significant amount of grief. Because, and I know this from just being a naturally angry person. Like I remember, I don't know if you know this cultural reference because it was big in the States. Any American listening to this would know the Sandy Hook shooting.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
This was back in, I don't even know what year it was, maybe
2009?
Yeah, I don't know, a long time ago, 2010, maybe 12, I don't know, a long time ago. And someone came in and shot a bunch of elementary school kids, kindergartners and first graders in an elementary school here in the States. And I remember that night being so mad. That's just how I deal with my big emotions, is I get mad because to me, it's safer and easier to get mad than to get sad. That's much more vulnerable than getting mad. And so I went home, and I was single at the time. I was living with some friends, and my roommate was like, "What is wrong with you? Like, you are so angry. What's going on?" And fortunately, she knew me well enough because I was like, "Nothing. You're just being stupid. That's what's wrong with me, you know." And she was like, "I think you might be more upset than you realize about this Sandy Hook shooting." And I was, and I went home after she said that and kind of helped me realize that's what was happening. I went home and I did grieve. I cried, I mourned, I cried out to God, and I beat my fist against my pillow in my bed because I was powerless. I could do nothing for those children. I could do nothing for their parents. I could do nothing for that community. And I hated that. But I think that is the answer to our griefs. It's not an answer that fixes it, but it's the same feeling I have when someone in my life dies, right? When I experience like traditional grief, it's you have no power in this. You can't do anything to restore this, to make this better. You have to live in the reality, but it was never meant to be this way. Like that is the solace that I'm offered in my grief, whether it's through some, a war, a tragic mass shooting, or a death, or any other piece of grief or fallenness. The answer is it wasn't meant to be like this, but it is. But it won't always be. And you have no power to restore it, but God is doing the work. You can only do what you can do, right? Navigate your life with God at the forefront. So it's not an answer that solves everything in the moment, but I think it is an answer that allows us to get to that place of surrender.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's such a that's such a common experience, isn't it? In terms of like, you read the news and there's an article about something happening. It feels like every day now, and then you feel yourself like either filled with anger or hopelessness, powerlessness, sadness, I don't know, and then how you tend to that. And I really appreciate what you said of like, it sounds like you really like let it out, like you said about like punching your pillow, like, um, and it sounds like I wonder, I suppose, what you were able to sort of like, what like, you were able to connect with about God in that time. Like, was there like a characteristic of God that you were able to like connect with in that moment with him? Like, what did you see of him
Yeah.
when you were meeting him in your grief?
I think he also grieved, like, that's what I
Mhm.
saw then and now is that I always say, like, I like to perch up my heart up in
Mhm.
heaven with God and grieve with him because I know he felt anger over the Sandy Hook shooting, over wars that have happened, over
Mhm.
deaths that have happened in my life that I've mourned. He's felt anger, he's felt sadness. I know he feels what I feel. He just feels it in a perfect way, and I feel it in a fallen way, right? But all the same primary emotions that I feel, I really think God feels. And I think that's part of the answer is when we're living in the reality of living out of Eden, the only power we have is to turn to God in our sadness, in our anger, in our grief, and feel it with Him. And then from that perspective, utilize that perspective to figure out what to do next, right? So, like, for example, with the Sandy Hook shooting, it's tough to use this as an example. I know this might be difficult for people to hear, but right, if I can sit up in heaven with God and say, God is angry. It was never supposed to be like this. God is angry that these poor children were taken way too early in this kind of way. He's angry with the perpetrator. I think there's room for God to be angry with even those that he loves, right? He is devastated alongside these parents. I think it's also true that he's devastated for the perpetrator's parents, for the shooter, and their loss in his life being taken. And also, he probably mourns over this young person who shot and killed all these young children. I can't remember now exactly how old he was, but he was also a young man, I think. And he mourns over that young man and whatever happened in his life that led him to doing this to other people, to other innocent people, right? So God sees the full picture even when we don't. Yes, he mourns and grieves and is angry over the same things we are, but he also mourns and grieves and is angry on behalf of, in defense of the perpetrators, not just the victim, but also the perpetrators, because he sees what we don't see with those perpetrators' lives, into the depths of their heart, the fallenness and the brokenness for them, the hole in their hearts that led them to being able to do this heinous act to other people. So once I turn to God in my anger and my grief, even if I'm fuming at the perpetrator, it's impossible once I turn to God. And the way I always start is I grieve with God. I'm angry with God over the victim. But then when I turn to him, it's impossible not to be influenced by his perspective. And when I am, then I can kind of level out a little bit and say, you know what? What happened to that perpetrator that would let him do something like this, right? This is so far from how he was created. He was
Right.
never meant to do this. How could he have gotten to this? Like, what level of brokenness and pain and hurt could have led him to this? It doesn't mean I'm okay with it. It doesn't mean I condone it. It doesn't mean that I'm over the anger of it, but it does mean that it gives me a bit more of a balanced perspective, and it brings me to a higher perspective of mourning the loss of Eden instead of mourning every single piece of grief and hurt and pain on this earth. Because again, if I trace it back, it all stems from the fall of humanity, us not living in Eden. That seems like a much not easier, but it's much more simple to grieve one big thing than 17 bajillion smaller things, right? But
Definitely.
that's how I process through it. How do you
Yeah.
process through living out of Eden with God, Georgia?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I feel like what you're saying about acknowledging God's grief is so massive, and I think it's a really big piece of it for me as well. And I think it was an important thing to identify as like an emotion that God has, because I think maybe previously I'd felt this sense of like, like maybe more of like a Greek god way of viewing God, where it's like he's kind of
Mhm.
careless about like, you're not that he's cares about my grief, but he's
Right.
apathetic to it maybe, or he's bigger than it, or something like that. Um, but being able to connect with the fact that God grieves, it created a greater intimacy, I think, between myself and God. But I think for me, I feel like um being able to so for me, even this week, there's a big case in Europe, in France. Giselle Picolette, I think her name is. I can't remember.
Mm.
Picolette, something like that. It's a really, really, really massive sexual assault case that is, in some ways, uh, it's it's um it's going to change history, because it is going to change some laws around the definition of sexual assault in France, which is amazing.
Oh, wow.
But of course, devastating that something
Mhm.
so big would happen, that it would lead to a
Yeah.
point. And I was really devastated by reading about this case, um, and especially because it's so connected to my work, and so I feel like it
Yeah.
it just feels very close. Um, and I had to just I think that, for me in that moment, after reading about it, I had to stop myself. I had to stop and be like, okay, I've read enough. I understand enough.
Mm.
I'm now feeling a lot. I need to spend some time in silence with God. And I think for me, like, this combination of like
Mm.
silence and visualization with God is so, so, so important. Like, I
Mhm.
think being able to like have a moment in stillness and sort of have an idea of like, yeah, like, where can I meet with God with this? Like, I
Mhm.
love that scripture of like, where can I go to be with the living God? I think it's Psalm
Mhm.
42. And for me, I remember in our sessions, coming up with this visualization of like this arena where I meet God, and it's an
Yeah.
arena of all these like shattered pieces of my heart, and they kind of
Mhm.
all represent, and they're kind of pieces of glass, but to me it's like they're pieces of my heart, and they represent different things that I feel pain over. So maybe it's like things to do with my family, or breakups, or things my friends have gone through, things I feel towards myself, like different parts of brokenness. And I was connecting with that about this case, and just like the stuff I felt over this
Mm.
case. And when I think about who God is in this arena, in this visualization, He is Jesus. I don't know, and He is reaching down onto these parts, these broken pieces, and He is just touching them, and He is just having His hands over them, and He's like, and in that way, He's like knowing them very deeply and
Mm.
recognizing how much they hurt, to the point where it's like, obviously He's touching glass with His hands, and so His hands are getting cut up. And um, there's that sense of like, He's being close to my pain, He's being close to my grief, and is willing to kind of be hurt with me over it.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, like you said, I don't think it has all the answers in it, but it does provide the sense of I think it alleviates an alone feeling in
Yeah.
the grief. And I think it also allows for an intimate way of being with God in those moments of like, wow, we are doing this together. We are in this painful world together. Um and yeah, I think, yeah, there's something in that.
Well, wow, Georgia, I think you just answered it. I think that is the answer. How do we navigate a life outside of Eden? Is to connect with God. And I think it involves the process that we've kind of laid out. We must grieve. We must grieve not just what we're encountering in that moment, but attach it to living out of Eden, to the fall. Grieve that, grieve living out of Eden, and allow that to take us to a point of surrender, recognizing our powerlessness and accepting the reality that is. But I think the only way to alleviate any pain, any hurt, I don't think there's a way to get rid of it completely this side of heaven, but the only way to alleviate parts of it is to connect. And I think connecting with God is the way to do it the best. And I love what you're saying, is that when we can turn to God and allow Him to keep us company in our grief, in our mourning, in our hurt, in our fallenness, that does take that edge off. Like, kind of like what I said in the beginning, that God-shaped hole in our heart, I don't think we can fully restore it this side of heaven, but I think the only thing that fits into that hole is to connect with Him as deeply as we possibly can this side of heaven. And I'm sure I've brought this up before, and I'm sure I'll bring it up many times again, but there's a famous trauma expert. His name is Gabor Mate. I'm sure you know about him. And he said something once that just blew my mind. He said, the human spirit is really quite resilient. We're meant to make it through a lot of difficult things. And I believe that. Like, I see that in the human spirit, in the human condition. God made us to withstand a lot, physically and emotionally. But Gabor Mate said, what we were never meant to handle, what is unbearable to the human spirit, is to do it alone. Right. And when I know this to be true about trauma, and I know you know this to be true about trauma in the work that you do, is most of the time when I meet with someone who has been through trauma, specifically like a sexual trauma, what is less distressing to them is the actual piece of trauma, the actual violation that happened to them. What is more distressing to them is that aloneness that they felt during it and after, right? Most of the time what they say is, how could God have left me alone in this? And how could my family not have believed me, left me alone in this pain afterward? And when I look at Jesus's experience on this earth, that is the point of most hurt for him, is when, when he cries out to God and says, why have you forsaken me? Why have you turned your back on me as I'm taking on these sins for all of your children? And so that is just further proof to me that we can handle anything as humans. God made us to be very resilient. We were never meant to be alone. We were never meant to be isolated in our pain. And I think what's also true about the fall is that we try as we might, we can't be to each other what we need from God. We've talked about that even from the very beginning of this episode with that example of my friend. She's not able to give her own child the love that her child was created for. We need to do that for each other as best we can. Yeah. But we can't put all of our eggs in that basket, right? We have to turn to God to fill up the rest of that void in our hearts. And so, I don't know, Georgia, I think you answered it. Like, that is the answer, through whatever means necessary, through turning to God, visualizations, silence, like whatever works for you, listener. Right. But connect with God in that grief. See it for what it is. It's the fall of Eden. It's you living out of Eden that you're ultimately mourning. Whatever you're upset about, trace it back to the fall. Allow that to bring you to a place of surrender. But for all that is holy, turn to God and connect with him through it, because that is the only way to withstand the hurts of this world, the fallenness of this world.
Definitely. And I think that's so important to say, because, on this podcast, we do like to have practicals as a giveaway, as a free giveaway. And I do think like just the practical, like connecting with God, however that looks to you. But I would also add to that kind of the way you connected with God over Sandy Hook is like just raw, like being raw with him, like not being afraid to bring it all, whatever it looks like, whatever your grief compounds, I think he's so capable of taking it all. He has and he wants it all. He's not just capable, he desires it as well. And I think that's I think those two things of like connecting with God and connecting with him with as much of the grief as you can understand, I think is so important for being able to like I don't know. I'm going to use the word metabolize. I hope that makes sense. Whatever it, for whatever it looks like to metabolize this idea of like being out of Eden and being in a tough world, in a messy world.
In a messy world. You know what I love too? I was just thinking, as you were saying that, like, I love your visualization. I love what you're saying about what I exemplified. Like, okay, just be raw. Like, don't be afraid to have God see it. God sees it already, whether you're trying to hide it from him or not, right? Like, don't even waste your energy in trying to hide it. Let it all out. He wants it. He wants to connect with. I think that's what he's most interested in, is connecting with us in our pain, in our anger, in our hurt, right? I have been too angry before, right? Like, I have sinned in my anger before and still turned to God and, let him see that even, right? Again, it's not hidden from him anyway, but at least if I can experience some connection with him through it, I know I don't want to stay in that space of sinning in my anger, but I also know that I want to connect with God even in my sin. And I love your visual of him sort of laying his hands over these broken pieces of your heart and letting him tend to it, offering us companionship in our pain. I would even add another way to connect with God is to think about what he's mourning and grieving too, right? Like, I think that we've sort of mentioned that idea throughout our time together today is that God is mourning over the same things we're mourning over, right? Like, not just the victim in whatever situation, whether it's us or someone else, he's also mourning over the perpetrator because he sees the whole story, right? So when I allow that to come into my awareness, it also allows me to connect with God in a way that's not just about me and my emotion, but in a way that's also mindful of him and his emotion and what he's experiencing. And I think that really builds an even firmer, deeper, more foundational intimacy when we can have a two-way street with God, right? When we're saying, hey, I need your companionship, lay your hands on the broken pieces of my heart, hear my roar as I'm telling you all these things I'm upset about. But when we can also say, now that I've processed through that a little bit, how are you doing in this? Right? Like, isn't that the mark of a dual relationship, right? Like a two-way street relationship when we can say, how are you doing in all of this? And obviously we can't offer God any like real comfort, but we can, he wants that. I think that does comfort him. It does bring him, happiness when we care about him, when we are mindful of how he feels.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you see that in Jesus, right? Like he wanted to offer his grief to his disciples. He said to them, like,
Yeah.
I'm overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Like, he
Mhm.
voiced it. And so certainly I think you know, yeah, of course God would want to make his grief known to us. I think yeah, and you're right. That's so the sign of like two-way relationship, like a mutual relationship, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So I guess our answers to living out of Eden, how can we avoid it? We can't. What can we do about it? You can connect with God. I mean, grieve, mourn, surrender, but ultimately all you can do is connect with God. And will that take away your pain fully? No, but it will take the edge off.
Yeah.
So, sorry not to
You're
give you.
welcome.
Yeah, so there you go, guys. You're welcome. All your answers or all your questions not answered, but that's our insight.